handled. It is really technical amendments. I don't know if any. I'm sorry. Nobody told me. Article 19. Donna, you could perhaps give us something on this.
Donna Moultrup, Director of the Health Department. I would just encourage all of town meeting to vote for this. You should know that health departments across the state are looking at regionalization. Of course, we're going to be asking the state for some funding, which will be a long battle. But in the meantime, this year we have asked for some legislative changes to enable communities to come together to be able to provide health services to all the communities, all the health services that all the residents in Massachusetts deserve. And every community, every resident in Massachusetts needs nursing services. These people work quietly. They investigate communicable diseases so that it doesn't go past the person or the family that has it, like whooping cough. You know about that one. Pandemic flu, you've heard of that in the context of disaster and emergency preparedness. And all of us, especially in health departments and other town departments, are also looking at some of these things, but especially health services, we just don't have enough staff, as you well know. And in an emergency, we need to call on other people. We're starting to write memorandum of understanding with other communities so that if we have an emergency, they will help us and vice versa. If you were aware of the hepatitis A outbreak because of a food service in Arlington and all the communities around, we went. We didn't have any memorandums of understanding. We just went because they needed the help, and they would have done the same for us. In this particular case, we are now looking to work with Lexington to have a very official shared nursing service so that we have one full-time nursing position with benefits, and that person will more than likely be 3 days in Lexington and 2 days in Belmont, which is essentially 4 hours more than we have now. We have a 10-hour position without benefits. We've had that position open since July of 2006 with no takers. I'm a nurse, and so Belmont has had the ability to have a nurse in the office at all times. That is not a very sustainable thing, and I've tried to convince people of that. Going forward, there are not a lot of nurse directors. We had 4 in the state. We now have 3. It's just not a good idea going forward. And the beauty of this plan is that if I have an emergency, and if Belmont has an emergency, this nurse will be available to us. Hopefully, Lexington and Belmont would not have an emergency together. But as you well know, I've talked about Region 4B. We're in a region of 27 communities. We have memorandum of understanding with all of those communities, and all of those people can send us help also. But this is a really good model going forward, and it's a way for us to have more nursing services and the ones that we really need in an emergency. Thank you.
Thank you.
We got a cost analysis of this.
Somebody else has the floor. So you were coming up to the microphone.
Well, I applaud that in the other department doing regionalization. I'm just a little curious to see how it worked and why Lexington, and was there a process, or in this consortium of communities, do you put out an announcement who wants to share? Just a little bit of background on how we came to this agreement.
Well, before 2006, when we lost our nurse, I was telling the communities, tell me when you lose your nurse. I need to know. Because the problem with all of these kinds of arrangements is you need all these little steps to be perfect in order for it to happen. And so all of the communities had different hours of nurses, and then they would have a full-time nurse. Watertown is a full-time nurse. Arlington has a 12-hour nurse. She doesn't want any more hours. I mean, it's just all these kinds of things. And so it just so happens that Lexington lost their nurse, and it's right about right now. And so they were getting a new director, and I had been begging Lexington, but you have to keep going back. I mean, this is not an idea that people think about all the time. Because as soon as I heard it, and I live in Lexington, so as soon as I heard that they had a nurse problem, I said, wait, guys, Belmont, we want to share, remember? And so when they heard that, it was fine. They had a new director that's coming from Watertown. He's enthusiastic about it. And so all the stars lined up so that this will work. And, you know, if the person leaves, I mean, we can all be aware of the problems with this. If that full-time nurse leaves, then that leaves 2 towns in a lurch. But we're much more able to compete in the marketplace with a full-time job with benefits than we would otherwise. I mean, we cannot compete with hospitals. I mean, the pay scale for public health nursing compared to a hospital, I mean, there's just no contest. You do public health because you love it, because you can live in your town. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons, but it's not money. That's not why you work in public health at all, but let alone nursing. So this is just a way. We're hoping, I mean, down the line, and I'm very active in the state regionalization working group, we're hoping down the line that communities can come together, more than 2 communities, maybe 5 communities. We don't know what communities will need. I have said that I think a 20-hour nurse is good for Belmont. We could survive with a 20-hour nurse. I could find things to do for a full-time nurse probably. But we're trying to look at the minimum we can get away with. We're not, you know, it costs money for all this stuff. So I have said a part-time nurse. I don't know, and you can't look at another community and say, okay, this other community has about 24,000 people, so they can have a half-time nurse too. That may not be the case. They may have a huge population of tuberculosis clients, which takes an enormous amount of time. So it really depends on what kind of needs there are in a community to match them up, which is why we think a larger conglomeration. Now, the work that's been done, they're talking about 500,000 people. In Massachusetts, that's not going to be palatable. We're not going to start with those kinds of numbers. But I think looking at numbers of 100,000 people might be realistic as far as staffing. No one in the country, and they've done a lot of work on this, no one in the country can tell you what's the perfect staffing for a health department. It's just not known. And we need to work on this more. We need to do more regionalization. As you well know, maybe you don't, Belmont, we have done regionalization work all along the way. We're in a consortium for mosquitoes, for hazardous waste, for nursing. We used to share an animal control officer with Watertown. We now have our each one has our own, but we have an emergency MOU for that. So a lot of this work is being done. It's to get the best benefit for the community with the least cost.
Thank you, Mrs. Moultrie.
Let me just say, as far as the cost to Belmont, it's going to be, it's not half of the benefits. So if you say a benefits package is like $15,000, it may cost us like $6,000 for benefits, and then it'll be 4 more hours per week. And that's going to run about $120 a week, however much that is, times 52.
Thank you, Mrs. Moultrie. Anything further on this article? Going on. Article 20. Is this one going forward?
Hi, Angelo Ferenzi, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3, and Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. The Warrant Committee and the Capital Budget Committee have recommended to the Board of Selectmen that this article be dismissed. The Board of Selectmen discussed this at some length last night, and it's likely, although we did not vote, that there'll be a 2-to-1 vote in favor of dismissing the article. I'm the dissenting vote. I think we're making a mistake in dismissing the article. I think we're setting ourselves up for a classic lose-lose situation. We've got ourselves at a catch-22 in the sense that we, by this article, are requesting the town meeting to give us the right to negotiate with anybody and everybody, including a developer that has an interest in it right now, to negotiate with them to sell the property. The Warrant Committee, the Capital Budget Committee, the neighborhood all feel that they want to know in advance what the developer is going to do if he gets the property. The developer's position is, I can't tell you what I'm going to do until I find out what it's going to cost me to get the property and what the terms and conditions of getting the property are going to be. So we're seeking the authority to sell it, but the consensus is that we want to know what's going to go there. The developer's position simply is, I can't tell you what's going to go there until I know what it's going to cost me and what the terms are of acquiring the property. So we've got ourselves at a classic catch-22 and are headed into a direction that I'm very uncomfortable with, and that is that we're leaving the developer with only the option to decide how he would develop the property he has control over right now, which is the parcel that includes the CVS building, and then the parcel across the street from Horn Road, which includes the laundromat, the bank building, the vacant lot, the building on the corner, the old SS Pierce building, and the Friendlies, or I guess that shows my age, Starbucks, the Starbucks building. He has control of all those properties, and he is free to make a presentation to the planning board for developing that in what he feels is the best possible way, and that's the approach he's going to take. So I think we're losing an opportunity here. I do agree with everybody's concern that it's in no one's best interest to present this to town meeting and have it voted down. That just is a further problem, and that we have no chance of getting it presented to town meeting without objections from the neighbors. And as long as we have objections from the neighbors, there's no chance of it moving forward. So we're left with a situation where the developer is going to be moving forward, evaluating his options, which do not include either access to Horn Road or the parking lot.
But there's no formal vote yet as to whether this will be.
The selectmen will vote formally on Monday night.
Well, I think in that case, if anybody wants to ask details regarding this article, it may still be alive, so if anybody wishes to speak. Mr. Leclerc?
Dan Leclerc, town meeting member at large and selectman. I just want to offer a slightly alternative view. I think Angelo's analysis is pretty accurate in terms of what the article is about. I think we need to take a breather on this issue. To me, it's akin to a labor management struggle where a judge says we need to have a breathing period, a cooling off period. When this was originally voted on by the Board of Selectmen, it was unanimously supported, i.e. the content of the article was supported, and I speak for myself. I still support the content of the article. I think it's a legitimate process that we need to go through, which in conjunction with the planning board planning review process is an excellent process, and I'm very, very frustrated that we can't move ahead with it. I was looking forward to it. And this came to me as a bit of a surprise. When we originally supported it, i.e. the content, and supported putting it on the warrant, it was my understanding that the neighborhood very much approved the Cushing Square overlay zoning concept. The data that I had at the time when I voted was that this was going to be a win-win. But recently, much to my surprise, quite frankly, some discomfort, I don't want to overcharacterize it, but some significant discomfort has emerged on the part of the neighborhood. And I feel an obligation to allow that conversation to take place. And I hope we can find some creative ways to get a conversation going so that in the fall, and remember now, Mr. Forensic, if you could correct me if I'm wrong, our position, I believe, is going to be we're only postponing this, or going to recommend until the next town meeting. I am not saying that it's forever. I intend at some time in the intermediate future to move ahead with this process. I don't want this cooling off period to last indefinitely. But in the meantime, I hope we can find ways, as frustrating as it might be, to get some kind of a conversation going with the relevant parties. And I'm being a little bit vague here because I need to be for, I guess, legal purposes, because we haven't really identified exactly, specifically legally, who the developer might be. But I just wanted to give a slightly different view from where someone else stands. In all due respect to Chairman Ferenzzi's position, because I know he's very disappointed. Thank you.
Since this is an article on which the Warrant Committee does have a position, I think, as a member of the committee, I should say, the majority of the Warrant Committee feels this should be put off, basically for the reasons mentioned by the last speaker. Anything else on this article? Okay. Moving on, Article 21. Some of you may remember when we first went to quarterly tax billing, we had to get legislative permission to do so. And I think this is the second time technical amendments have been required to that legislation. I don't believe it's otherwise of much significance. Article 22. I see we have a representative of the Planning Board, delighted to discuss this article.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Heim. Sammy Baghdadi, town meeting member, Precinct 4, and member of the Planning Board. This zoning article is literally a clarification. Currently, the way the article reads is that a garage, a greenhouse, a tool shed, or a similar structure, and I'm reading from what the existing bylaw says, may be built to within 5 feet of a side line and rear line of the lot. So it sounds like the structure has to be within 5 feet of the property line. The new language clarifies that because that was not the intent. The intent is to create a 5-foot buffer or a 5-foot setback. So the new language would clarify that, and it will specifically provide that any such structures or accessory buildings shall, excuse me, shall be set back at least 5 feet from the sideline and rear line of the lot. It's just literally a pure clarification.
Anything further on this article? Thank you, Mr. Baghdadi. Article 23. Mr. Baghdadi.
Okay, thank you. This article is a little more substantive. What this, in my tenure on the planning board and as a member of the Belmont Center Planning Group, we have heard numerous residents say that this town basically has too many banks. Belmont Center has 5 banks. The town-wide, we have 13 banks. Banks aren't a bad thing, but as we're looking at trying to revitalize our centers and our downtown areas, the problem we're facing is that banks close at 3, 4, or 5 in the evening, and then they are a blank spot in the center. What we are trying to encourage is a revitalization of the centers in order to accommodate and encourage foot traffic in the evenings. And banks are not conducive to that. The other complaint we have heard is that banks, particularly outside banks, are willing to pay more to be located in town in order to compete for our rich citizens' savings, which isn't a bad thing for landlords, except it does tend to price out some of the smaller retail uses that we would also envision for a town like Belmont. Currently, banks are allowed, except they do require a special permit if they are in excess of 5,000 square feet. What this requirement would do is it would make banks allowable by special permit across the board. It would not prohibit banks. They would still be allowed, but they would have to go through a special permit approval process before the Zoning Board of Appeals. Also, existing banks are grandfathered. So provided they're not expanding in their use, they would be unaffected by this bylaw.
Just a minute, just a moment, please. On behalf of the Warrant Committee, I think I should make a comment, then Mrs. Price. It's unusual for the Warrant Committee to take a position on a zoning bylaw, but a majority of the Warrant Committee recommends disapproval of this bylaw, primarily on the grounds that banks are very good paying tenants, which leads to more taxes. Mrs. Price?
Actually, it's Jennifer Page.
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question. Perhaps there's a person from the Zoning Board of Appeals here this evening. I don't know if there is. But my question is, does the Zoning Board of Appeals buy into the same arguments that the Planning Board has made, so that there would be a high probability that they would, in fact, limit the number of banks in Belmont? And the second part of my question is, if they did so, what is the appeals process from a decision of the Board of Appeals? In other words, if in turning down a request, would they be exposing themselves to sort of overrule from some higher authority that did not necessarily have the interests of presumably the town of Belmont at heart?
Well, I think I should probably try to answer that. I don't see a member of the ZBA here. Also, the ZBA, do you want to? Okay, I was going to try to protect you from giving any views on. That's fine.
Rebecca Vos, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3, and member of the Zoning Board of Appeals. The Zoning Board of Appeals doesn't have policies other than procedural policies in terms of advancing what the Planning Board has determined to be in the interest of the town. We simply interpret and apply the zoning bylaw. So we are presented with, should this amendment pass, we would obviously enforce this. We would look at the application of a bank and simply follow what the bylaw tells us about what has to be met, what conditions have to be met in order to issue a special permit. And this is certainly something that was true with many restaurants before the zoning bylaw was amended a few years ago, and lots of other, and that's by way of a use permit. But we also have the authority to grant special permits with respect to any sort of some certain kinds of modifications to residences and other kinds of buildings. So, we certainly have experience with this. And as to your second question, Jennifer, should an applicant be unhappy or abutters be unhappy with the decision, they either party has the right to appeal either to Superior Court or to the Land Court and proceed through that process. Does that help you?
Thank you, Mrs. Vos, and I don't think Mrs. Vos can be any more specific because the case might come before her. And I think she went about as far as she could on stating the situation. Yes, ma'am.
Chris Cokum, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 8. I just had a question about the grandfathering in of banks. If a bank, for example, Cambridge Savings Bank was on one side of Leonard Street and they moved across the street, but say they were to move out, could a different bank take that position, take that location, or would a new bank have to get a special permit in order to continue to operate in that spot?
Mr. Baghdadi?
My understanding is that a new bank would be able to come in to the old spot, provided that they weren't expanding the use, renting additional space and expanding. The law would look at the use and not necessarily the user, so that use would be grandfathered for that location.
Mr. Baghdadi, there was a second part of the question, which is could they move across the street into a non-bank? And the answer to that, I think, is no without a special permit.
Without a special permit, they could not. Yes.
Okay. Anything else on Article 23? Article 24. Mr. Baghdadi.
Okay. Sammy Baghdadi, Planning Board, and Precinct 4 Town Meeting Member. This article also is meant to clarify and aid in the enforcement of the regulations with respect to window signs, and it actually came before the Planning Board through our zoning enforcement officer, our town zoning enforcement officer. Currently, window signs are permitted for retail establishments. Permanent signs are permitted as long as they cover no more than 20% of the glass of the window. Permanent and temporary window signs can cover together up to 50% of the window. The problem with the current bylaw is that it defines a window sign as being affixed to the window, as being attached to the window. So our smart retailers are locating their signs 6 inches away from the window and saying, you can't regulate us, it's not a window sign because it's not affixed to the window. So our zoning enforcement officer has said, you know, we would like a clarification to say that if a sign is within 3 feet of the window, it also qualifies as a window sign and can be regulated.
Thank you. Any questions on this one?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Mike Sullivan, Precinct 3. I work in a retail store. I don't see why the town's involved with this. I mean, shouldn't like the town business association be involved with this? I don't see why the town should regulate this.
Well, you know, we do have a sign bylaw, and towns regularly regulate towns. And you know, our concern is primarily one of aesthetics. You know, signs do help businesses because they help to attract business, but then again, if we are oversigned, it can look too overly commercial and it can detract from the character of the community. The other thing is, you know, windows provide a safety feature for businesses. If some activity is going on inside, residents from the outside or pedestrians can view if there's a robbery, for example, and covering all the glass with signs would prevent that kind of a safety concern also.
What about a store that has a storefront that you cannot see inside the building?
Well, you know, I guess my response is what the questions you're raising are debating a regulation that currently exists, and all this amendment is designed to do is not to revisit the wisdom of that regulation, but just to clarify so that the language fits in with its enforcement.
My problem is I just think that attached to the
Would
building.
you, stay near the mic, please, sir?
My problem, I think being attached to the building, inside or outside, is fine. The town should have a say in that, but it's just odd that you tell someone they can't do something to their storefront inside their building.
Okay, it currently exists. I mean, it is currently on the books, and this is not designed to re-question that law. It's merely designed to address a loophole that some retailers are trying to take advantage of.
Yes.
Jay Sklug, planner. Also, just for clarification, this is not talking about window displays. Window displays are still fine. You can still put, you know, your goods or whatever it is that attracts shoppers in your windows. It doesn't control that at all. It's only when you start attaching signs, you know, prices and all the rest of it to that display, and they're too close to the window, effectively blocking the window, and really, in a sense, acting in opposition to the reason that you're putting in the display in the first place.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay, so if you put a sign in the window and it doesn't have a price on it, is that,
No, it's still regulated because it's still a sign.
so you can't say, buy Nike sneakers
Right.
in the window? So you,
Well, you can, as long as it doesn't cover more than 50% of the window.
all right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
David Chase, Precinct 3. How did you arrive at the 3-foot setback from the glass? That seems, I'm somewhat sympathetic to the concerns. 3 feet is quite a distance.
It actually, the zoning enforcement officer recommended that, and it's a door width. When you open a door, that's usually your window display on the, you know, as you come into the store. It's about 3 feet. That's where that comes from.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mercier?
Donald Mercy, Precinct 8. When you're talking about signs you know, it can be rather an ambiguous term. Some of them are done with letters. You can deliver messages with any type of a device in the window. And you take your bookstores, for instance, they could put many, many books in the windows. And are those signs? Because there's printing on those books telling you I have ABC book for sale. So I don't, and the other thing that could happen, people can be hanging curtains in the windows, blocking off a substantial view, and maybe on that curtain they might hang a small sign. Now, is a whole thing that's blocking the whole window with the minimum amount of lettering on it, is that whole piece a sign? It's very ambiguous terms, and I think you know, most store operators are probably trying to make a reasonable living by putting in sign, and I think the business associations themselves should be talking to each other and talking about oversign. I've seen some buildings that there's way too much signage and you don't get the message because it's overdone. So these are all a matter of opinion, and I think should be addressed by the owner and the business associations to improve their own neighborhoods.
Ms. Baghdadi, do you have any response?
I think everybody is raising valid concerns, except, the concerns really address the underlying regulation, which is already on the books, and maybe that should be revisited. Again, this is designed to get around a loophole where somebody, puts a sign inches away from the window or a foot away from the window, and claims that's not a window sign, so it's exempt from the regulation.
Well, sir, if Mr.
If I may,
let's not argue here, and if you're going to address, please go to the microphone.
if I may, just to further clarify, the current zoning bylaw has a definition of what a window sign is. It's a pretty clear definition. It's available on the town's website if anyone would like to go and look at it. And this article would not change that definition other than by this question of is it attached to the window or not. I'm sure people have different opinions about whether that's a good idea, but we're not really here to debate the article. We're just here to understand what it does.
Anything further on this article? Well, we'll leave the debate to town meeting, where I'm pretty sure there will be a debate. Next article, Article 25. Okay. This is entitled Road Stabilization Fund. What it is of no effect if there is not a so-called roads override. But it does set up the account in which any funds which do get approved by a roads override, technically it's not an override, we'll call it an override, set up something, a place in which to put the funds. But it is of no importance whatsoever should the roads, and I gotta use the word override, fail. Any questions, comments? Yes.
I believe I'm right that town meeting already has authorized $1 million a year to go into a road stabilization fund. Is that right? No. Capital, say again?
Mrs. Bruce?
As a result of the override in 2001, $1 million every year is given to the Capital Budget Committee to spend on pavement management. That is not going into the Road Stabilization Fund. However, if the roads override were to pass, that $1 million will still go to roads every single year, so that the $2.5 million for the override will be added to the $1 million that is currently being spent on roads. But the capital budget money will not be going into the Road Stabilization Fund, which is a special fund set up by the state. And the reasons for that is it's very complicated to explain to the voter how we would do that and not be taking the money away from what we had promised in 2001. So we've left it that way for now.
Am I right in understanding then that the total amount available for the roads per year is going to be 3.5 million?
Absolutely, yes.
So my question is,
Yes.
is that 3.5 million sort of in perpetuity?
Yes, as long as it's appropriated by town meeting. Yes. It is the amount of money that the Pavement Management Committee recommended be spent every year. It's 3.5 million, and right now we have $1 million.
Okay, and I don't know if it's you or Mr. Castanino who should answer this piece of it, but am I right in understanding that the sort of the 2.5 million override, it's necessary in order to bring our pavements up, sort of up to standard, right?
Yes.
Over a period of a long time.
Correct.
Like
over 20 years.
20 years.
Longer than 20 years.
Okay. And then at the end of 20 years, we would still be spending 3.5 million a year on
Well,
roads.
every year the Board of Selectmen will look at the condition of the roads and make certain that the $2.5 million is continuing to be needed. However, it is anticipated that at the end of 20 or 25 years, the roads that are currently in reasonably good shape will in 25 years not be in great shape. Just as with our roofs and our school buildings, after 20 or 25 years, they need some refreshing. So it is anticipated that yes.
All right, thank you.
This is technically a capital outlay. In fact, the selectmen and town meeting can reduce the appropriation from year to year if they so choose. And supposing they reduce it from 2.5 million to say 1.5, it cannot be raised again except with a popular vote. It's a fairly complicated statute, but in essence, the selectmen and town meeting, this isn't like a debt exclusion where you have to keep appropriating the money. If town meeting and the selectmen so decide, they can stop the project.
But stopping it wouldn't then reduce the tax, it would simply allow the... Oh, yes, it would.
It would reduce the tax, It's a somewhat complicated statute, but that's roughly what it does. Yes, sir.
Two questions on this one.
Would you identify yourself?
Kevin
please?
Cunningham, Precinct 4. It was unclear from the language. Is there a cap to this fund per year? It says 2.5 if the override kind of, as an aside, it doesn't say this is a capped fund. Is it an amount limited fund?
It would be the 2.5. The maximum would be the 2.5 million plus 2.5%.
This is assuming, like, it could be, though, that the requested override goes to 2.6 million, and does this language have to change, or is it an open?
No,
okay. It's for whatever amount.
The only increase that can be made is a 2.5% increase on the 2.5 million, and that can be done each year.
The second question is, if this does not pass, what does that say about the override? Is it defunct? Does it make it that it can still have an override, but we don't know what to do with the money? What's the consequence of this act?
If this fails and the override, the so-called override then passes, we just have to have the same article at the next town meeting.
Okay.
Anything further on this article? Okay, next, Article 26. This is an article looking for legislation to put a question on the ballot regarding whether or not the selectmen can grant a liquor license to the VFW. It cannot take effect without a popular vote. Yeah, excuse me. Well, I regarded the legislature approval as more or less automatic as long as the local representative doesn't say no. But Mr. Ferenzi is right. Technically, it has to be first approved by the legislature. No comment? Okay. Oh, sorry.
John Robotham, Precinct 2. I'm curious as to why we're doing something special for the VFW for a license. I know I've read a lot in the newspaper about the VFW having trouble financially. Is this essentially a mechanism to help bail them out?
Mr. Ferenzi?
Angelo Ferenzi, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3, Chairman of the Board of Selectmen. Essentially, we're in the process of trying to negotiate a lease with the VFW, and there were some conditions that we have set forth in that lease. And those conditions are that they demonstrate to the town that they have the wherewithal to be able to maintain the building and so forth, as well as to maintain insurance in the building. And one of the other conditions is that all activities that take place in that building have to be consistent with state, federal, and local law. All right. Not surprisingly, there was alcohol consumed at the VFW, and without a license, it's a question whether they give the beer and wine away, whether they don't give it away, whether they pay, they get free beer with their membership. It's a very nebulous thing. So the easiest way to clear that up is to give them a club license. There is special state legislation that allows VFWs to get club licenses. This is not unusual. Many, if not most, VFWs have this kind of a license. Using this word a lot tonight, the catch-22, in the sense that they can't apply for the license unless they have a lease, and they can't get a lease unless they have a license. So that's one of those details that we've got to work through. But at least we want to get to the point where they have a contingent lease based on the fact that they in fact get the license. But as stated earlier, it has to be approved by the legislature. It has to be voted on in a town-wide election. So we're just trying to keep that whole relationship above board and within all of the state and local laws.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not Chris Cokum, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 8. I believe that there's a similar precedent was set when we voted as a town meeting to allow the Belmont Country Club to have a liquor license. So I think there's already precedent.
Yeah, that's a little bit different in the sense that when we did pass that, we made it very restrictive. We said it only applies to country clubs of certain size memberships and so forth.
We put in the words you have to have an 18-hole golf course.
18-hole golf course or something.
It's not
in order
likely
to apply
anybody
for it.
else is going to do that.
There are many other clubs that sort of at their meetings might have alcohol available, we're just trying to be sure that we make it easy for everybody to at least be doing what they're doing under the guidelines of the law. The VFW, like I say, is a unique situation in the sense that they've got their own legislation available to them for this option. So.
I just want to clarify, because some people may be looking at this saying, well, geez, I've been in other communities where the VFWs or some other clubs have licenses. Belmont, as you know, is a unique community, and we do not recognize Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 138, which is the liquor license regulations. If we were like a number of other communities and recognized Chapter 138, the VFW by right would have an option to receive a license from the Board of Selectmen. But since we don't, and all our licenses go through a process where we have town meeting, legislative approval, and election, this is why this is going through this process, very similar to the beer and wine, the alcohol restaurant license, the package store license, similar process.
Yes, ma'am.
Sherry Jones, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 2. Is the assumption here that we will no longer need to subsidize the VFW if this passes?
Can anyone answer that?
We are currently not subsidizing.
What about electricity?
No, that was removed, okay? There is some problems associated with that, though, because it is unclear in terms of what the town obligations are, and this is part of the ongoing negotiation between the town and the VFW. They have documents which they've presented to us, which demonstrate that the town has agreed to pay them up to $5,000 a year for giving a home to the American Legion. There is, and that was done under the auspices of giving a light department credit. That's how they received that, all right? And it never really got institutionalized. It was sort of there. Members changed, the Board of Selectmen changed, it got forgotten. The new light board manager came in and said, why are we issuing this credit? You know, we can't do that. They stopped the credit. The light board forgot that they were supposed to get the credit. They started getting bills. I mean, not the light board, the VFW. They started getting bills. We started making demands on the bills that they owed us. It turns out they came back and said, what about our credit? Where's the money for that? And so there's this ongoing negotiation that's going on. And we're trying to get to a compromise solution with the VFW that they can live with and that is consistent with our goal to do everything above board and according to commitments that we've made. So there's a question. I mean, it's a negotiation. It's an ongoing negotiation. They could come back and say, gee, you know, we haven't collected our $5,000 for the last 10 years. We have a letter that says that you owe it to us. Where's our $50,000? It's a negotiation.
Just like to clarify one more thing with regard to this article, and it is mentioned in the slide. The process here works pretty much the same way that other liquor licenses have in the town. If Article 26 passes, then the town sends a bill to the legislature. If the legislature passes that bill, then a ballot question would be placed on the town election ballot for the voters. If the voters then approve that ballot question, then the Board of Selectmen would still have to hold a liquor license hearing on the question of whether or not to actually grant a license to the VFW, and that would be a public hearing where anybody can comment just like the other license hearings that we've had.
You introduced the concept of sending a bill to the legislature. Could we have a bill in the other connotation of the word? Well, we could send him a bill with some money.
Oh, I see. Got it.
Yes.
Rosemary Burke, Precinct 2. Is there a process in all this for determining actually what the function of that VFW post serves today's veteran? Or is this all a reaction to an older veteran population and grandfathering in almost current activities that are occurring in a VFW post? Or has there been any process to actually think about and look at how that VFW post serves today's veteran, which has tremendous mental health problems, physical problems, and not so much perhaps looking on their VFW post as a beer hall? I'm just wondering, is this all sort of a...
That's not for us to deal with.
Well,
the VFW is an independent organization. They have certain protections and support that's intended to give them to them by the community. We've got, you know, we need to provide a facility for them. We've got to make something available to them. But it's not up for us to determine what their program should be. That's outside the scope of what that we as a community have to do. That's.
But isn't that what this is?
What?
Reacting to what their program is?
No, it's a social club. You know.
If it gets that far, Mrs. Burke, you're of course free to vote against it.
I mean, we also have a veterans agent in town as well, that we're required to have, that deals with some of these issues.
Ralph Jones, Precinct 2, and a member of the Board of Selectmen. I think the question that was asked about the subsidy needs to be explored just a little bit more, because we do not collect water or sewer revenues from the Post. And while there is Mr. Ferenzi is correct that the town can provide up to $5,000 in assistance to the Post under Chapter 40, Section 9, that needs to come through an appropriation. And so far it has not. And I think it would be better and more transparent if we actually made an appropriation through town meeting in the future. Certainly have the authority to do that. It may be a very good thing. But right now it's been done with either unpaid light bills or unpaid sewer bills or unpaid water bills, and I think that's less clean than actually having an appropriation.
Mr. Baghdadi?
Yes, Sammy Baghdadi, Precinct 4. The only thing I would raise in the course of the lease negotiations, because the town does provide so much to the VFW, I as a resident one time asked if I could use rent a room for a birthday party for my kids, and they wanted $200 for a couple of hours in the afternoon. It would be nice if they could also give back some kind of a courtesy to the residents that are giving so much to help subsidize their operations.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Joel Samuels, Precinct 6. Two questions. One would be, what would be the cost by the VFW in obtaining a club and all alcohol license should this pass? And second, is it only limited to members of the VFW as far as those who could purchase alcoholic beverages, all alcoholic beverages at that location?
Do we have an answer from? Yep. Mr. Town Administrator?
Oh, thank you. Gosh, I answered so many liquor questions. I'm wondering if people are thinking something different of me. The fact is that the board has not determined yet what the fee would be. I believe the Alcohol Licensing Review Committee have recommended a minimal fee, but the board has not taken any action on that. Our fees generally, I believe, go up to, $4,000 for a retail license, but the board has not addressed the fee structure yet for the VFW.
You had a second part to your question,
Yes, the
sir?
second part of the question is, would only members of the VFW and their guests be able to purchase alcoholic beverages of any kind at that location?
Statutorily, that's correct. It depends on how you want to determine the word guests, but statutorily, that's correct.
Thank
You must have been a lot of alcohol at the town you were at last.
Actually, there was.
Yes.
It seems to me Donald Mercier Precinct, it seems to me some of these costs are minimal, and I think people don't realize these are veterans who have serviced us in other areas in this country and in this town. And I think, we're giving money to all these other organizations, the art cult, the art people and all these other people. To me, a little payback is in order here for veterans who have served this country. I don't care what age they are or what condition they're in. It shouldn't be, we're talking about the older veterans. Well, we got some younger veterans too that have served this country. We have firemen and policemen. We do all these things for these other people. Don't forget those veterans have served the country.
Thank you, Mr. Mercier. Anything else on this article? Okay, we're at Article 27, which is essentially a water line pipeline easement over the McCain property. Anybody care to say anything further about it? Over the McLean property. As I understand it, the town does supply water to the McLean development, and it's thought necessary to have a formal easement my own memory, as I was on the planning board at the time, the breakup of the McLean land was approved, is that we already provided for that, but apparently that's not sufficient to. Yeah, yes, sir.
Donald Mercier, Precinct 8. If that line's to serve McLean property or property owners in that piece of land, I would hope that we're not going to have to maintain that line any further than the property line, such as our own private residences. Is that true? You're talking about an easement. I don't think I need an easement to go over my property.
Mr. Casadino?
To serve my own house.
The town owns all the water mains in town on public ways, private ways that serve all residents. This is a transmission line that actually serves McLean. There was an old water main that served McLean. This was a replacement of that line that actually cuts all the way from Concord Avenue through the property to Mill Street. It not only supplies water to McLean, but the other developments as well. Of course, they're all billed for it. McLean actually has master meters that bills them entirely for their water use, even within their own system. Not at each building like a residence would. I would also say that the system also, because the water system is a matrix, it all reinforces all that area. It reinforces the entire system with a better supply of water, especially for fire flows and things like that, should they become necessary. So it is valuable, and the town maintains all water mains. It was the intention to continue to do that, as they did before with the old water main that was town-owned on McLean land.
Thank you, Mr. Castino. So, you had a question, sir?
Yes, this may be out of order. This is just a general suggestion, which a number of people I've talked to may agree with, and that is, could we possibly start town meeting at 7 p.m. instead of 7:30? A lot of people have to get up at 5:45 or 6 o'clock in the morning. In the last few years, we've been adjudicating a lot of very important issues at 11 p.m. or 11:15 p.m. So just like to make a suggestion, if that's appropriate at this point, for the powers that be to consider such a starting time.
The powers that be are the selectmen.
Is that possible?
We'll certainly take that under advisement. One of the things that does happen is before town meeting, there are meetings with the Warrant Committee, the Board of Selectmen, and the Capital Budget Committee. So we all start meeting at like 5:30 and at 6 o'clock and going over a lot of stuff even before we get into a 7:30 meeting, which is one of the reasons why we need some of that time. It's not that, we can just get there and start right away. So that's one of the reasons why I think we start at 7:30. We, are working very hard to try to bring, not bring in one of the guidelines we set up for the moderator, I'm not sure it's the moderator's guidelines or the selectmen's guidelines, but no new business is brought before, after 11 o'clock. So, we're, I think, very mindful of the fact that, people are tired. We certainly are tired, are anxious to get out of there as well. But the reason for the 7:30 start is because there's a lot going on before that.
Mrs. Bruce, you have a better memory than I do. Wasn't it advanced half an hour a few years?
We just changed it from 8 o'clock.
It was advanced from 8 o'clock to 7:30 a few years ago. That's the last article. And as I generally say to the Warrant Committee about this time of night, it's about my bedtime. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Well, I expected to have to do it. So.
What?
No, I expected to. Even when I saw you, I knew I was going to do it. So.
Yeah.